welcome everyone to the Augmented Society Network. This week we are talking about the drive to inclusion, where some of the systems and technologies that we're all used to working with are not serving us well in terms of promoting inclusion. In some cases, some are being designed to ensure that we have an exclusive future, which is not going to be helpful for any of us. So this week's topic really is to look at that, to discuss ways in which we can bring about change. I think everyone here is aware of the Augmented Society Network. We're a thematic network, part of the Royal Society. We've got a very interesting event coming up next week on the 23rd, the global launch of our learning paper. That will be 8 a.m. Pacific time, slightly later in the day, Julie. It's 4 to 6 p.m. And so if anyone here can join us there, that'd be great. So today's topic, I hope everyone's seen that on the site, but Jonathan and I kind of kicked off the conversation earlier, and our concerns really are about things that are in place at the moment, the technologies that are using the past to map the future, and how that can be changed. We also want to understand how we can use technology to get into our deeper consciousness, if you like, to ensure that we can be without bias. Or is that absolutely impossible? The way we arrive, the way we are as people, brings clearly biases of all sorts. How do we make ourselves aware of that, and how do we pinpoint that in some of the technologies that we're all working in? Jonathan, I wondered if you wanted to just sort of kick us off.
Sure. Ultimately, we have spoken at length about the bias in algorithms, or the concerns about, we know systematically there are pieces in place that are meant to keep people in their place. As we look at the new horizon in front of us, the constant evolution of technologies, society, the way we think, there's an interesting concept of the clumsy Samaritan, where we try to do things that are better, or thinking about everybody, when in fact it's sort of like, well, you help that person, but you hurt that person. And where we've talked about the negatives in technology that could exclude, I come into this with a bunch more questions and no real answers of what can we do? What do we need to be looking for? If somebody on this session knows of that magic bean that will solve all of our ills, please share that here. But short of that, I think we will come out of this session with a good sense, hopefully, of what are those pieces that we can look for to really promote inclusion, to really promote the fact that we're all here. Even with the best intentions, you know, the question of, when you're programming something, it's sometimes limited by who you're actually talking to, and the ones that are most important are the ones you're not speaking to. So I would love to discover some of, whether it's programs, technologies, examples of those that have truly built an inclusive environment, whether that's social media, whether it's actual community events. That would be awesome to be able to share here. And certainly, if you're not on this session live and listening to it in podcast, please always feel free to share with us, whether it's going to the augmentedsociety.org site or in emailing us individually. So my thought to start this off is, if in the past our systems have been put in place that are effectively thinking or moving forward as if there's a limited supply of fill in the blank. And so therefore, if one gains, the other is bound to lose. I'm wondering if one of the keys to our success moving forward is if we truly embrace the fact that there are plentiful resources. And by me having more, not only doesn't mean that others should have less, but it should be we all can have more. And how do we make it so that we all are included in that more? So any thoughts on that as a general kickoff?
I think I struggle with the more thought in the idea that somebody else is having less. This is a very entrenched thought, and I know people who are deeply affected by, if someone has more than me, I have less, that this is a world of less. I don't know how we get to a world of there is plenty, and I'm not even sure what we're talking about the plenty of yet, plenty of justice, plenty of equity, plenty of opportunity, because there isn't plenty of some of the resources. So this is a thinking question, not a resourcing question. I haven't asked a question there, by the way. I'm just having a think. In a lot of ways, my life is about understanding that there is a great deal less of everything, and that I need to conserve and I need to operate in that way. But in another sphere, in a thinking sphere, there is plenty of everything. There is room for everything.
So if I have some fire and I share that fire with another person, I haven't really lost anything. And if my fire goes out and I've shared it with some person, then they can share their fire with me. But if I have a cookie and I share it with another person, I end up having less of a cookie. And I think that, there are many in society that look at inclusion in using that cookie analogy versus using the fire analogy.
I think that's an awesome illustration. Really do.
It's funny because I feel if we're talking at macro level, everybody's really fixated now on the haves and the have-nots and the divide therein. And those that haves are havesing a lot, and it's increasing how much they're having. Whereas those that don't, it's greatly diminishing. And to me, it feels like the resource that is not evergreen and plentiful is things like coal and gas or oil. Yet those are the pieces that we continue to throw money at, and governments continue to support, whether it's because they figure it's an infrastructure thing. And when you look at how much people were going against clean energy for the longest time, and people continue to rally against clean energy or electric vehicles, et cetera, looking at that as if it's a bad thing. And I know that changing over to electric vehicles doesn't mean that you're not using those other natural resources, because you need those to work. It's to Mitch's point about the cookie. Are we looking to share the wrong cookie? Are we old-fashioned and thinking that it's got to be that cookie? Certainly going in, I realize how fortunate I am to be in Southern California, where if I was vegan, intolerant to gluten or things like that, I've got so many resources around me here that many people don't have the resource to pick any shop and get a wide array of things. So my question is how do we as society generate more awareness or help make it so that people are more comfortable with change, with the fact that those things that we held so dear in the past are not, you can still love them, you can still have a nostalgic feel for them, but change, like embracing change, I think is going to increase inclusivity, because we've talked about the other, we've talked about those types of things, and making it so that people are not afraid of meeting those people or working within environments that they are not absolutely certain about. But how can, there's so many pieces in this toolbox that seem like they're right there, yet we don't reach for them.
I just wanted to segue on from that, giving somebody fire, because that actual whole concept goes back to Native Americans. Their analogy for this, the force of life and nature, is fire. And you could argue that when you look at life and you can't create life, you can only share it. And that fire is very similar to taking a cookie. But I wanted to go on about the inclusion that was just mentioned. I'm doing a paper on putting a wheelchair on a plane. I've been doing this like for 5 or 6 years, and the goal is to get a powered wheelchair just go on an aircraft. All right. I'm actually actively working towards that right now. And Kate Holmes, she's come up with this 3 steps. One is first to recognize the exclusion, and then 2, to learn from that diversity that you've spotted, and 3, once you've solved for that person, then extend it to many. And I'll give you one example. So a few years ago, I worked in Airbus in Toulouse in France, and we made a crazy plane called the A380. And in the time I worked there, it was called the A3XX. And we were doing a virtual reality demonstrator. And that was like one of the things I'm into. But the thing is, I tell you about this story is we put a lot of effort, myself and some German colleagues and French colleagues, into making it very photorealistic. We hired a very powerful silicon graphics, and we had a NASA fake space VR unit. So it was full stereo and very wide screen. For those times, it was unheard of. And people were queuing up to try it. And they'd been in the wheelchair for about a year, I think, a young French female engineer. So I passed them the fake space booth. They brought it down to the headset. And because of time for the stand, you could like push yourself forward like a video game. And they were kept going on this bloody thing. And I had a big queue coming in the Paris Air Show coming out off the stand. And I said to them, you know, it's okay. And I don't mind you using it, but you've been a long time. And he turned around, took the thing off me, looked me in the face and said, it's great. Nobody has to push me. All right. And from that moment on, I've been trying to help wheelchairs and aircraft ever since. All right. Kind of subconsciously as well as consciously. And I think for software, it's the same. I brought up a thing. Apparently, if you've got VR and you've got like a disabled child or a child with autism, they can all play together no matter what state they are, because they're actually able to like do things and manipulate their own environment. So I think there's an example of technology, gaming, VR, teleoperations, as it were. There's software. If we could make software just like we have these non-touch surfaces, that's great. If you can operate a trash bin by waving your hand, but if you're blind, it's rubbish. All right. So you got to think about other people, have like compassion. Sorry, I've gone on and on and on. I've waited a while to speak, but I just thought I'd do one big download in one go.
That's great. Thank you, Glenn.
No, but we should just think of others and have compassion to others and empathy. It's really empathy for other people, because one day I'll probably be driving a bloody powered wheelchair one day myself. So you're kind of selfish circle in a way, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And so that designing, some people might refer to it as designing for exclusion, which is exclusionary in its own self, but understanding others and talking to others. I was talking earlier about how as a designer I might work and I might have a focus group of people, but those are people that have been recruited. How do you actually get to those people that aren't here, who aren't showing up, who are so excluded that they're not in anyone's conversations? How do we really go about bringing the excluded into these conversations so that world can be created?
Sorry.
Glenn brought up a really great piece of talking empathy. And if we wanted to dig deeper, I could say, Glenn, when in that moment that person turned to you and brought up that piece, that obviously you had built this entire environment, right? Like you had a hand in building this environment where you were thinking, oh, I'm sure you were thinking, yes, we need for compliance with regulations or whatever, we needed to be able to accommodate people, but never even thinking from the perspective of them and that idea of, I don't need to be pushed, right? And so many of the time, if we were to look at all of this as a yes and instead of taking away. When we talk about highlighting the excluded, again, we don't have to think of it, well, we're taking away from ourselves. And I've had this conversation with others about the BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement has been around since I think 14, but it really obviously took a much bigger part in our consciousness last year. And I personally think that the BLM can become greater in the refinement of their messaging, because too many people think of, oh, well, it's all lives matter. It's not about saying that Black lives matter more than others, but by taking away everything else and focusing on the perspective and the issues that Black people have to go through and telling those stories, you then can get, hopefully, people to understand, oh, geez, I never thought of it that way. And so it's not necessarily about just going into the Black community, the urban community, however you want to exemplify it, and saying we're going to help these people. To me, the power in the BLM is getting people to recognize how systems have put certain people in a certain place that they might not have considered before. And so the same thing with what Glenn was talking about. If you were able to have the ability for somebody to be in a wheelchair getting onto a plane that doesn't hold up everybody else on the plane. So like the human nature of being pissed off that we're gonna take off 3 minutes later than we were supposed to because we have to accommodate this wheelchair. Then you start seeing, the yes and the possibilities. Oh wow, if this can happen, or if this is the experience that somebody's going through, well then this is how this can benefit other experience as well.
Good point. Just so you know, the idea at the moment is there's a lot of A321s, and our concept is to use door 3. And door 3 is like a big empty area, because I used to work at Airbus, and the bottom line is like an attendant seat will move out the way, we'll move some seats, we'll put a pallet down, and we'll have like the system you put in a minivan that's tested to 20G, and you'll pre-board. You will pre-board before everybody else. And there's a machine made in Austria that can raise you to the right height. And funnily, if 1964, the British team were actually used the cart, the galley carts that get put on, they actually used that truck to actually load wheelchairs in the back of a DC-8 in 1964. Yeah, and I actually got in touch with the British Olympic Committee and a lady called Wafula Strike, because her story, she was left on an aeroplane, and that kind of moved me so much as well. I've been in touch with them. And you probably know that story from the BBC. It kind of broke my heart to think that you've just competed for your country and you're left on a plane. It's appalling. It's wrong. And it's not just charity. It's like the fact that you can't do it on a plane now, it kind of gets on my nerves. We can fly to the moon. We can fly to Mars. We can even have a remote helicopter doing drone flights on Mars, but we can't put a wheelchair on a plane. It's ridiculous.
Okay, so I can spin that another way. We can get millions of people in the U.S. their vaccination jabs.
Oh,
right.
This is a sore subject.
Whatever. I mean, again, it's about systems that are in place, and the fact that there are other. This is sort of funny. A influencer from the UK, 23-year-old, somebody asked, have you been vaccinated? And it wasn't clear to her vast community of fans, followers, that she was in the UK maybe. And they said, oh, are you vaccinated? And she says, no, I'm 23. So not recognizing that 23-year-olds are not yet cleared to get the vaccine in the UK, people were giving her crap for coming up with memes of, no, I'm 23. And it's that type of lack of openness and understanding. Instead of somebody saying, wait, well, why would you say, no, I'm 23? Instead of if they did that, instead of going out and putting all these memes and creating hatred or discourse, that's a perfect example of everybody's in different situations. And how do we get rid of that? Carlos, you took yourself off mute, and I know you're probably dying to say something.
Hello. Well, no, just as thinking out loud. I'm going to put some thoughts on the table. One, I think that technology could help us a lot. For let's say Siri and Alexa will help a lot of people with cognitive disabilities or any other disability. And there is a lot of examples of that, which is great. And that path is going to continue, which is good. Only for a few, that's the sad part, but it's good that that is happening. As people with Asperger, they're putting some glasses. The glass has AI and recognize the face, and it sends an emoji to the person saying happiness or sadness, so they can relate better. That's an example. There are a lot. But I'm gonna go to another point. I'm gonna put the example of the Me Too movement. When the Me Too movement got really all over the place, the Oscar ceremony was at that time. They put a lot of women on stage. That's not what we need. That's like, I don't know, cleaning your hands. So, and I remember Thelma and Louise, I forgot her real names, saying that 20 years ago, when they received the Oscar or whatever about this great movie, they thought that things were going to change. 20 years ago. And in a way, they couldn't say it up front, but that when what they were saying, these two actresses, is in reality, nothing has changed. So Black Lives Matter, inequality, gender exclusion, whatever, we need to go to the root cause. And I think we are not working on that as a society, because we can have examples of inclusion. We can have examples of schools that are more included, or companies, or whatever, which is great. Don't get me wrong. But if we want a real change, well, besides the Me Too movement, we will have to have a hashtag saying men, not macho, something like that. And have Brad Pitt saying, hey, I don't need to be a macho to be a man. Or George Clooney saying, I don't take Viagra to be happy. Or I don't know, something like that. Like these men saying something and start to change the male chauvinism, patriarchalism mindset. And then maybe in 20 years, Thelma and Louise could say, okay, something is happening.
Completely agree that the conversation has to be an inclusive conversation, and it cannot be me acting with male kind of characteristics as a way of feeling like I'm making progress. So am I in a cage? And unfortunately, Amy isn't here this week, but she will talk about being caged. Am I being the woman that is genuine and womanly and true to myself? Or am I adopting male traits to get ahead? So am I playing a game, or am I truly being the person that I
have been following women CEOs pictures, and I have never seen a woman CEO dressed like a real woman. Well, real woman, we will debate this forever, but normally they have pants, they have short hair, not a lot of makeup, but they don't have all this diversity that women have, which I always envy as a man. And I try to dress some small things, but you're totally right. They have to look like male and talk like male to be a CEO. That's ridiculous. There are, of course, there are.
As you're talking, and it's interesting because the actresses that were in Thelma and Louise were Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon, who to this day are some of the most active talents, like socially active, right? But most people really pull out of that movie Brad Pitt, that was his breakthrough role, and you look at where Brad Pitt is now. All of this stuff, it's to me like we're trying to tamp down the symptoms of the to have women do this or be something, instead of focusing on, well, why is it that they have to be this? It's not like that's a symptom of the fact that there's misogyny. That's a symptom of the fact that that there are systems in place to hold others down across the board. Whether we're talking about women's issues, whether we're talking about not just Black Lives Matter, but indigenous peoples around the world, all those types of things. I saw something today, like I don't think it was Warren Buffett who said this, but it was like, what is the best way to be rich, to be wealthy? And the number one thing to do is be born into a family that's wealthy.
Right.
Like, that's crazy. Maybe it is, as I was saying with BLM, that the messaging has to be the strongest in terms of, this is what the issue is. This is what you're not seeing. It's not enough just to say, as we know, it's not enough just to say from a BLM perspective, oh, I've got friends that are Black. It's understanding more of like, why is this whole community affected? And by understanding that, we can start looking at how are these other communities being affected. Julie, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was thinking about a few things. So today I attended a Zoom thing that went on for hours this morning about placement, and it's about how lots of different kind of companies use art for inclusivity. So they kind of create various kinds of projects with kind of very diverse communities to try and bring them in, because obviously there are lots of people that kind of see art as elitist, so they're not going to want to engage, and they were kind of bringing those things. And I was just thinking about what you were saying, just Jonathan. At the end of the day, it is, for a Black woman, it's a tick box. There are, you go for a job. I've been for jobs with friends, and we both applied for a job, and I've not got it. And I'm far more qualified than the other person because they already had their Black quota. My friends have got jobs. They said, oh, how could you not get the job? I did their application form for them. I did their CV for them. I did the interview preparation for them. But yet we go for the interview and I don't get the job. And they have far less qualifications for me because there's a quota. And if you've already got your quota, it's not going to happen. I was reading today on the article on the BBC about talking about CEOs, and a woman was saying, I can't remember where she worked for. She said when she applies for a job, when she turns up as a woman, they double check her CV because they do not believe that a woman has that many qualifications to be a CEO, and they question her CV. If a man turned up with the same CV, there's no double checking.
Yeah,
it's a tick box exercise. It's standard, and ultimately, with all these things, when you say, oh, Black Lives Matter, etc., then there comes a point where there's almost an apportioning of blame or responsibility. There is a reason why certain groups of people in society are oppressed, are marginalized, are excluded. But when you recognise that, it's a case of why has this happened? And the first thing actually is that there is somebody to blame for it. There is a root cause. If you can't accept what the root cause is and the people that are in those positions that are kind of still causing the oppression, nothing's ever going to change. We can talk about BLM and all this stuff till the cows come home. We can talk about social exclusion, people being marginalised, kids not being at school, county line drugs. It doesn't really matter what we talk about. Ultimately, there are people that actually are inflicting this on people, and unless those people are removed or those people are challenged, you can't even get to those people to say this is what's happening. Nothing's ever going to change. And that's ultimately what's going to happen. Black Lives Matter, yes, but as soon as Black people gather up together, they're seen as aggressive. They're a mob and they're aggressive. That's what happens. That's the attitude that comes, aggression. No, we're marching peacefully, but no, we're too many Black people. Whoa, we're aggressive. We sit quietly, we're still aggressive.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you think of look at America. We know, with the storming with Trump, and all the rest that went on. Had they been people that had been rushing in there, the guns would have been out. Everybody would have been shot. But no, because it was white people, they were allowed to go in. That is fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even taking out the violent part, the fire that Kamala Harris comes under as vice president is so much greater than the fire that any previous vice president has come under.
And so how many also, if I show up with my background in technology and I go with somebody else, then I have to understand that that is not trusted. That is not what I'm seen for. It is not going to be something that people take for granted that I know and understand. I work on the board here, and I have conversations with suppliers who talk to the male board members. I ask the question, they answer to the male board members. And it's like, excuse me, I'm here. Julie, I know we've also talked about the fine line between being the aggressive Black woman as well, and how that tempers behavior or immediately puts you into a segment that people then feel they understand and will then respond to in a specific way. Because we're all segmented. We're all, just the minute you see someone, you think, you put them into a place and you deal with that person accordingly based on your years worth of bias. So not only is it about who isn't here, but it's about who is here and what you see when you turn up. Is it Gladwell's blink, for example? We're all just as infected. Sorry, Julie.
I was just thinking about a job that the university job that I had with me and a friend of mine, you know, same position, etc. And so we had the course leader, and right from day one, he didn't like me. So my colleague, he'd be standing there and he'd be chatting to her about her work, and he'd be massaging her shoulders, and she'd be looking at me like, what the hell's going on? And she would have a heated discussion with him about something, and it was fine. When I had a heated discussion with him, he went to my line manager and complained about me being aggressive. Well, I tell you what, when I walked into that office, I was aggressive. I literally flipped my lid. I said, do you want to see aggressive? How's this? Let me fall into that racial stereotype because you've called me aggressive. But you're sitting there next to my friend, massaging her shoulders when we're having a conversation. When she raises her voice, it's fine because she's white.
Yeah.
You know.
I love your passion, Julie, talking.
Oh, don't get me started on stuff like that. Do not get me started.
Can I bring up another subject? Well, two subjects. I'll be honest, if you're male, it's sometimes not that great either. So if you work in a really highly technical company and you're a designer, I've actually been called to my fails, well, you're just the felt pen fairy, shut up. If you're not one of these managerial alpha males, you're kind of screwed anyway. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's true.
So you've got that. If you think with the other side of your brain and don't fit into this classically MBA career structured BS. And the thing about America, you're right. If you're born into a rich family, but it's rags to riches and riches to rags in 3 generations, and you see it in so many American societies. All right. And the second subject I go on to is, so I have to take it off to our company. We've really embraced it. A lot of the engineering bosses now in our company are women. My last boss is female, and she reported to another female boss. And my mentor in the fellowship program is also female. I have to tell you, typically a woman that makes it in engineering tends to be twice as good as the average male. That's just an observation, right? But what they do, they have to make it happen. But what we did a presentation on was what's known as the model minority. Has anyone heard of the model minority?
No.
Because that was how it started. What it is, so they had a great presentation of 6 Asian people from India, from the Philippines, from Beijing, like somebody was from Singapore and somewhere else. And what they said is their problem is the opposite. So everyone expects you to be really, really good at maths and technical subjects, but they do really well in a job, and then they've got this terrible glass ceiling that they never get to manage anything because they're so good at what they do. And then the other thing is they've got the worst mental disease rate in America because so much is expected of them by their families, by society, by the company, by everything. They've kind of got like the back end of it. And it was kind of interesting because every one of them seemed to have a PhD and were like super highly technical people. But I thought I'd bring that up, the two aspects. Yeah. You know, it affects a lot of people. It's just people being so alpha male, out for themselves, kind of selfish.
Yeah.
And it's like, people. Yeah.
We're all in this. We're all in this. We're all horribly biased. We all come with our own prejudices. we all are to blame and to thank. And I think it's about understanding your position within that. So when you arrive somewhere, firstly, you have the privilege of being able to arrive. So we're very lucky, all 6 of us sitting here, or 7, or whoever, how many people we've got. We're here because we have somewhere to live, etc., etc. So we bring all of those biases with us. So it is a problem and an opportunity for everyone, but it's who shows up that actually makes some of those decisions about everybody who isn't showing up. But I completely agree, Glenn. We're all guilty of bias. I don't know if anyone saw, this is just an aside, The Secret Diary of David Copperfield, the recent film.
No, heard of it.
So all of the roles have been swapped.
Sorry, about the literary character or the magician?
Yeah, the literary character. So David Copperfield is black Asian, and all of the characters are reversed. And I didn't really notice, someone told me. And then I started to see the different themes within. And I think it's in that the idea of privilege is brought in when someone mentioned, the rich people in the story have been given something at some point, and there's just this little quip about, oh, but there was the copper mine that you inherited, and it's like, oh, yes, oh, I forgot that, and that's why I'm in the position I'm in. Well, David Copperfield himself is fighting poverty, and he's a proctor, so it's fascinating in that he's judging and marking everybody in a system as well. It's a fantastic film, but totally beside the by.
But how do we get people's mindset to change? How do we open everyone's eyes to see what's going on? Because we all discriminate. We all, like you said, we all have our own prejudices and issues. But how do we get people to listen to that and see the other side?
Yeah. And
I was just going to say
really,
that.
that's the question. That's the question.
Yeah.
Look, Julie, I have been working, I don't know, for 20 years about instilling humanistic management practices in companies. And that's the question that I do to myself. Why we show to CEOs and top executives that companies that practice humanistic management are much, much better than the average. They have less turnover, more motivation, more engagement, better profits. Everything is great. Why they don't follow that? Because they have to change their mindset. When you need to change the mindset, then it's very difficult. And that's what we need to work on. Besides all the BLM and Me Too, which are great, we need to focus on the mindset. And that has to start from families and the schools, because it's more important to teach math, but we should be teaching emotional intelligence and creativity, piano, violin, but no, math is. So every time we went to the parent teacher conference, I arrive and I see all these parents, and I love to see how, I'm a sociologist also, so I love to see how society works. And I said to my wife, look, that one has to be the math teacher. They have a big line, and then, that has to be the art teacher. Nobody is there. That's the point. That will be a long conversation, how to change that. That has been my question, and I don't have answers.
It comes down, and Carlos, we sort of had this back and forth in the chat about mental illness and the causation. And again, everything that we deal with, whether it's you going to CEOs to say, hey, here's examples of other companies that are doing really well, doing things differently than you might be doing. And they say it sounds great, but not willing to put the work into it. It's hell. Again, it comes down to I need to hold my own. I need to maintain what I worked for, whether they worked for it or whether it was just given to them by their parents or luck, whatever it is, this is my rock, you're not entitled to it. And so it really is such a deep shift in mindset that how are we going to get that shift in the mindset throughout society of we're only going to succeed if we bring everybody up with us. It's not about stomping down on other people's heads in order to get ahead. And I liken it to when I was in college, I wanted to try out the fraternity situation that you see in American schools, American universities. And in that, there's all this hazing, and it sucked. And everybody says, when you're pledging, this is inhumane, this sucks, I don't ever, like, this shouldn't be happening. And what happens when they become brothers? They do the same thing to the upcoming pledge. And I went into my fraternity and I said, I want to change things. And I pushed so that there was none of that hazing. It was more about making sure people learned the history, like the things that might be helpful in terms of brotherhood, not getting the shit kicked out of you, but about being a brother to others. And I couldn't tell you how long that lasted after I was gone. But there's that human thing of, you know, even if this sucks, it happened to me, so it should happen to another person. I don't get that. So, like, how do we change that root? Because if you look at the last elections, and I might have brought this up in one of our sessions, the last elections, the fact that the Cuban Americans in Miami, the ones that had come over, were 2 generations from the boat lifts that happened when I was in elementary school. They had switched from Democrat to Republican. And the reason is that they wanted to maintain with conservative values about impinging immigration, even though they only got here because of immigration. I mean, hell, in the United States, how many people can't tie to immigration for coming here? You know, but then there's so many people against it. So it's that whole thing of, well, I've got mine, you stay out of it because I need to maintain. Again, it comes back to, how do we change the mindset to the realization that resources are limitless? And I'm not saying that it has to be money. You know, some people would just be really happy to not have to worry about whether they're going to have a roof over their head. Or if they choose not to have a roof over their head, that somebody's not going to come and arrest them for being in parkland, that maybe they didn't read the rules correctly. Like, it's all these types of things, and being open to each other and open to the fact that just because this is what you're used to or what you are comfortable with doesn't mean that it's the same for everybody else.
That's kind of the role of the RSA, was people that made it an industry. I think if you have a life, you get to a point in your life where you realize that the way you controlled things earlier and the way you got on doesn't always work. And then you start to think a little bit about your surroundings and have empathy to people. And I bet the RSA is a lot about giving back to society and trying to spread the arts and improve people's lot. It's a bit like the Sermon on the Mount, treating others as you'd like to be treated. It's the golden rule, but applied to industry, I believe.
So then how can we tamp that down, or push it down in terms of age range? So it's not about those who have already gone through a career and have found that comfort, whether it's comfort financially or comfort mindset wise, but how do we instill that younger? Because we are seeing in these younger generations that they are looking at what's a company's actual mission. It's not just about, I'm going to make, you can't just promise me $150,000 a year in finance and think that I'm going to be coming to work for your company. It's, what are you about? And we're seeing that. My only hope and prayer is that that continues to grow and blossom, and that those people don't get jaded and get to the mentality of, I got mine. But how do we push that mindset down?
I think, unfortunately, people start there, but when you get to the top, the view is very, very different to the bottom. It's like social scaffolding. You climb all the way to the top, but I tell you what, you best make sure you remember everyone I went, because the moment one of those rungs break and you're back down the bottom, everything's like, oh, look, that's where you are. You get to the top, it's a beautiful view, and you forget about what's below. That's what happens. You know, with all the best will in the world, you have all these aspirations about what you're going to do when you make it and the difference you're going to make. But when you get there, you've got money, you've got the wealth, the different kind of social interactions, but what you set out to do, you forget about, think of all those kind of, the charities where the CEOs are on more money than the Prime Minister. Yeah. This is charitable money, donations that people are giving for the charity. The CEOs earn more than the Prime Minister. I mean, how does that work?
So when
you got to the top, you're taking the money.
and I work for a non-profit, and I asked the question once, are there any people who are not personally wealthy on the board of trustees? So they understand money and they know how to spend it, and they have no understanding of not having it. There was no equality in that respect on the board of trustees of a non-profit. And I was frowned upon for having even asked, actually.
Mm.
You got your P45.
Good question, though.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
But like I said, they get to the top and they forget. Yes, I am. And they forget the views, the different views, different perspective. You know,
Right.
you've got money, you've got wealth, and it's different. You forget why you wanted to get into a certain position.
No, one of the best examples of a solution of pushing it down is Charles Dickens's Christmas thing with that guy and the turkey. What's it called?
Scrooge.
Scrooge. What we want is
Yeah.
a modern version of Scrooge. So code that up and make it into some kind of ransomware. You know, be nicer, you selfish git, or you're going to have it. You know.
I like that.
It's
Yeah.
we're either going to call it the selfish Git program or the third door. I like that third door thing that you used before.
Yeah, you'll be visited by the ghost of Christmas future.
You could do it like, you know, like Play School. They always had 3 windows. Pick the
Oh, the
window, the
round.
round window, you know.
The
And
square,
you can
that's
have
right.
the software, pick a window, and that will be your future. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As ransomware.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, they had to pay it. You know, when they did the pipelines here in Colonial Pipelines in North Carolina, they just paid it and then went after them. So it must have affected them. They must have been pretty stressed out for a week. Give me that, I'll tell you.
Yeah. I think that there's something really interesting when we talk about those that have, and I really don't like the term or the ideas of cancel culture, but we all do play a part in terms of our consumption, right? And I'm more into bringing up the issues and trying to affect change. I had a conversation with my wife yesterday. It is so convenient for us to order from Amazon and have something a day or two later. Don't have to leave your house, any of that type of stuff. But then you read what conditions the warehouse workers, especially at their warehouse, the biggest one, it's the biggest one in the States, JFK 8, just outside of Manhattan. And it was a cesspool for COVID. It was the computer systems. This is one of the biggest technology companies in the world, and they couldn't get their HR computer systems in line. New York Times did a big expose, and there's other coverage. And ultimately, there's still people that work there, and you can't say I'm going to stop buying from Amazon. There's obviously the convenience factor, but if we all stop buying from Amazon, just at JFK 8, that's 5,000 people that work there. And do they lose their jobs? And so it's so intertwined that until we really become mindful of all of these pieces that are all tied together, we keep on trying, again, it's the symptom. We try to tamp down a symptom, and just right there, we don't do the inclusion, because by tamping the symptom down there, it brings another one up over here. And it brings in, like,
yeah, what you're also saying there is we are very lucky in that we live in a world where we can make that decision. I can decide, I can make a change. For many, that isn't in the equation, is it?
Right. But is it putting the onus on those who can are the ones that should be pushing things in the right direction?
I think it goes back to what Julie was saying. It's so systemic. It's beyond what we can do as a small group.
Julie, I have the solution.
Ooh,
Ooh.
do tell.
You need to create a virus. Then the virus will go.
Not another one. That was you the last time, wasn't it?
Then you need no. This is an system virus. Then you send it to all the Alexa, Siri, and all the assistants, personal assistants. So every time a CEO or something is saying something, then Alexa will say, hey, Jeff Bezos, don't you think you have enough money? Don't you think you have to change the way you treat your employees? And then he doesn't know what happened. It's a virus. And then the same thing happened to everybody. And then they will start reflecting that they need to change.
I like that idea. I'm going to go and do it now.
That's a really good idea. That would be a great novel if you're a writer. The day Alexa got God, you know, discovered Christianity or discovered a faith like Buddhism or Islam. It'd be great if one of these artificial intelligence that's serving the world actually became spiritual. It'd be a very interesting book.
So can you imagine if ransomware went out, don't send me $5 million in cryptocurrency, change the way you do your business, and then we'll unlock your system.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like that.
Holy moly, that would be a great.
That's another good
that would
one.
be a great.
But we're talking about reality. We want it to be real. We don't want it to be a film. We don't want it to be on Netflix or HBO
Star
Plus.
Wars. No, I kind of agree. But look at Star Wars. More people believe in the Force than nearly anything else.
a really good book, a good author is Anne Leckie and Auxiliary Justice, which is about an artificial intelligence that is stuck in a spaceship and it's desperately trying to get out and to make change. And it takes you a long time to realize that actually it's the artificial intelligence that's talking. And it takes you on all sorts of different journeys. And she's an incredible writer as well. So I would recommend that. I'm going to sort of wrap up a little bit. We are getting to the end. And the level of systemic issue here for me goes back to, there's a great exhibition. I put it into the chat. So there's an exhibition at the Barbican 2-3 years ago by a guy called Kevin Paglen. And it's based on Trevor. He uses ImageNet and it shows you the bias in that. And this is the database that a lot of AIs are being trained on. And it's based on a bias of what people see. It's actually categorized by humans and computer. But then I want to go back even further. The taxonomy that was created on which ImageNet runs was created by, I think it's 6 white guys at Stanford in the 1970s. The level of privilege involved in that takes me back even further to a colonial world of 100, 200 years ago. The level of issue that is here is beyond a single campaign, whether it be cancel culture, BLM, or any of those little buzzwords that we're so ready to fall back on now. The issue is enormous, and one that I would like to be part of the solution, to go back into another phrase. Oh, I wish I didn't have to do that, but the level of the issue is enormous. And I think by understanding who you are when you arrive somewhere is one of the first things that I have trying to learn to do, is understand who I am when I am where I'm at. And I try to do that on a daily basis, just in a very small way. And that's actually very handily the topic of our next session, which is, do you like what I did there, Julie? Which is actually on the 15th of July. And it's about beyond systems and being and belonging. So we're going to move this conversation forward and make it about how you are working with what we've discussed today, how you are actually involved in that, which I think I'm very much looking forward to. I think, as usual, Jonathan Tavs, this was a very difficult but very necessary conversation that we've barely take a little chip out of, but we've got to start somewhere. And
I before you did that beautiful segue to the next session, I was going to bring up I wanted to offer that we don't subscribe to the idea that we as a small group can't do anything. Because we can on an individual basis, whether it's for our, as Carlos inserted into the conversation earlier, mental health, for our own mental health, doing what we can on
Yeah.
the small scale, changing our perspective on things that are happening around us. We might not have control over everything that happens around us, but we absolutely have control on how we respond and how we move within those situations. So I'm really looking forward to the next month's session where we get to unpack of where we individually are in this space and how we can change perspectives and interactions and outcomes because of it.
Yeah. And this has got nothing to do with anything. However, I am just reading Atlas Shrugs by Ayn Rand, written in
Shrugged.
the 50s. Atlas Shrugged.
It's in the past. They're not still shrugging.
But that's about when certain people stop caring, isn't it? And I know it was grabbed by various different political groups these days, but it's still an absolutely fascinating read about the discussion between capitalism, communism, between privilege and the idea of not being included or not being part of something. So that's everybody's reading.
I have a viewing option as well, which I think everybody on this, whether you're listening or here right now, would dig. There's an anthology series called Solos, which I believe is on Amazon Prime. And they're short, 35-minute segments. But Annie Hathaway, Helen Mirren, Anthony Mackie, Morgan Freeman, each one has a different one. And it talks about self in space and time, looking at future, looking at how we consider our past, all of those types of things. And seeing Helen Mirren, who is a powerhouse actor anyway, seeing her doing, being, Zoe, when you brought up that spaceship thing with AI, it's her in a spaceship at the end of her life or near the end of her life, having a conversation with an artificial intelligence.
Oh, right.
The controller of the ship. It's such good writing, such good directing. It's obviously, you could tell it was a COVID product because they didn't get these big casts. It's one person and in each one. And it's so far what I've seen is brilliant, and I offer that up. And maybe that gives us some insight also for the next session.
Thank you. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure as usual. Thanks everyone for coming. Hopefully we'll see you next month on the 15th. But equally,
hopefully we'll see you next Thursday or next Wednesday, the 23rd, for our global RSA launch.
Big day.
The celebration of the people that did all the work, the hard work, and the hope that it's people, we've got, as of yesterday, we had 85 RSVPs. And hopefully we'll get a bunch of people that are eager to take this forward and make it a reality.
Hopefully. Okay,
Cool.
great.
thank you.
Thanks,
Ciao
guys.
for now.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Mitchell, Jonathan, Zoe.
Bye.
Bye.